Well, welcome back. It's the last one, so hold on. Um, I think we're kind of going to talk about stuff that Tim touched on in his great introduction about what communication strategies for galleries can mean in terms of not sales straight away, but how can these things can build up to a certain momentum. Um, we have Ocean Word, whom you know from yesterday. He's the head of content at Lisson Gallery and a very respected art critic as well. We have next to me Rebecca Taylor, who is executive vice president of Fitz&Co, which is a strategic communications and marketing firm specialized in arts and culture. Prior to Fitz&Co, Rebecca worked at MoMA PS1, the Getty, and MoCA Los Angeles. And here we have Richard Scott, who is founder and director of the PR agency Scott&Co, which is a communications specialist with over 16 years experience. Scott&Co developed global strategies for Frieze, the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, the Royal Academy of Arts, Thomas Dane Gallery, Stephen Friedman Gallery, among others. And we will be hearing about what you do at Scott&Co in a bit. So we're going to start with Ocean, his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lorena. So, how do you engage new audiences? Let's engage my first slide, and then, so what? Everyone is always thinking about who their audience is, and we're doing the same in the art world. So, yeah, curators, the new artists. Who's running the show at the moment? That's always what we need to ask ourselves. These slides, by the way, are from Pablo Helguero, who many of you know from his Artoons. And poor artists still think it's about them. But realistically, who are we aiming all of this stuff that we're pushing out at? So I'm going to be really quick because I realize we're all tired. And this is the same problem. You know, we live in different art worlds. I do this, I do photography, you do contemporary art, you do old masters. We don't talk to each other. But there are all these different places. So I don't know if we'll get on to what exactly all these new audiences are. Are they in Asia? Are they young people? What are we talking about in terms of new audiences? I will not answer that question because I think it's kind of up to you guys to say what your new audience or where you want to be is. Do you want to be in the sea of boys or in sea of Warhol? So I just say a little bit about what I do because I get this a lot. I think I saw something about you doing something somewhere. And this is me, not being a stroppy teenager, but being head of content, obviously, at a large London gallery. And this is a nice collector called Peter Ross, who I was ignoring. I was doing a performance work for Corey Archangel at our booth in Frieze, and I was supposed to watch Anchorman 2 and ignore anyone who came to the booth to ask about the work. So that's what the head of content does. And then this term content, I think Tim and those guys touched on it very well. It's this idea that, I don't know, what am I creating? What is content in a gallery? Like, you know, this new term, content creators, these people are taking the piss out of it, Dead Content Creators Society. It is this kind of strange term, but I look at it as being kind of everything and nothing. It's everything in a gallery. What is our content? It's the artists we work with. It's what the artists are making. It's what the gallery is producing. You know, content is king, I'm afraid to use that. But I'm also keen to not get too deep into a kind of theoretical wormhole here because I'm aware that also the language that we use can be off-putting. So I don't want to try and create a sort of further layer in front of the audience. I just want to tell them about the art. So we use Instagram. My colleagues will be horrified because I made this presentation last year. We have more than 100K followers now. And I'm sorry because some of this I was supposed to turn up last year and I didn't. So some of this is more about social media than necessarily we might talk about PR, we might talk about other things. But you know, there are examples of galleries and museums who do it very well. This is Tate. This is my old job where I invented art Twittercism, which was how to be an art critic in 140 characters or less. So there are lots of ways. You know, I think a social media post is a way of getting someone interested before they go further down, deeper and down. This is what happens when you leave journalism. The Tate send you a post saying wilderness whereabouts unknown, no longer in journalism. So no clearer than anyone else what my job title is. But Lisson Gallery, we do follow this same model. We have a news post. We try and keep people up to date on what we're doing, and it follows that. It looks a bit like the old Time Out site that I used to work on. That's funny. But also looking at what everyone was talking about previously, Tim and those guys. Who are we? Who's producing this content? This is a great work of net art, or a work of art in which someone has tried to scour the Tate's website and use an algorithm that will describe all the works in the Tate's website. So this novice art blogger is actually telling you how to describe these things. So a Turner here is a close view of a hole next to it, or I suppose a close-up of a hole. I'm reminded of a picture taken from the back of... Anyway, it's nonsense. So robots are not going to be making this content, you'll be glad to know. Technology is amazing. So more content was created in 48 hours in 2015 than from the beginning of time until 2003. So content is everywhere. Let me skip through before I waste all of our time. So what we do at the gallery is we promote our artists. This is a work of art by Corey Archangel. He assembled cats to make a piece of classical music. He also uses the internet himself, so this is his Sorry I Haven't Posted website that aggregates all these people who haven't posted for a long time. And for his exhibition, we actually used what you all know as clickbait, those annoying things at the bottom of the website that tell you stuff. And so we used at the bottom left here, it says, 27 signs your cat hates you, Lisson Gallery. So we found out you can post anything on there. You can make up anything. The only thing they didn't want was any swear words or anything like that. But so 27 signs your cat hates you takes you to the Corey Archangel page on Lisson Gallery. Why? Doesn't matter. It's clickbait. Same here. We have absolutely ridiculous ... So that was part of his show. So what I'm trying to say is that to use social media to engage people, to engage this audience, let's say, you can use the artist's interests and practice as much as you have to use some kind of gallery strategy. So we also do normal things like Corey did a talk, and for another exhibition we used clips of films that we were showing as part of a campaign. So I'm not going to watch Dan Graham, but essentially what we would do with the social media to engage these new audiences, use the medium, use the strengths of the medium, use the strengths of the work that we're trying to show to populate those campaigns. And this is an example of that. A short clip from a piece for an art fair, good way of publicising what we're doing at the art fair. That's it. I'm done.
Okay, so you work across social media campaigns, press. Like, do you touch upon all these different strands within what the gallery does?
Yeah, unfortunately, because, even though we're a mega mid-sized gallery, that, we also I don't have a department for everything. So I kind of do oversee press, communications, marketing, and that includes all of this, as well as, publications and writing, and there's a lot going on, but there's not a lot of us doing it. I know it might seem...
In a gallery like Lisson, how seriously does it take social media? Because Saskia was saying that, don't leave it to the interns, just really engage with it, because it'll bring much more return. So in a gallery like Lisson, who does the social media within?
We share it, and I think we do have one person, but it's difficult. It's difficult to maintain a tone. It's difficult to maintain an interest. It's difficult to keep it up. You've got other things to do. So, of course, it's sometimes going to go through periods where we're just announcing stuff that we're doing or artists are doing. But we will occasionally try a social media campaign or try and do something where people will stop and they'll be like, okay, what is this? Why, we had this on our booth at the art fair. You've been here before. It was brilliant. Every time people walk past, they were like, oh my God, I've gone, out the other side. So what I'm trying to say is that basically the work should be the starting point for all of this. So the best social media work that we do usually comes from something that the artists have done. Corey's a special case because he works with the internet, but I think that that's the best way to do it, is to use the content to drive that rather than just sort of emitting stuff.
Great. So we'll come back to that, but maybe Rebecca, you want to talk about what you do for your clients.
I think she's going to switch it for you.
Oh. Can you start on the other website? Perfect, thank you. So I work for an agency called Fitz&Co. I'm just going to tell you very, very briefly about it, and I think I'd rather us be brief in our presentation so we can take questions and have a conversation. Everything my agency does is about audiences and audiences for arts and culture. So what we do is we work within all the different kind of platform structures and ways of doing that within the art world. The traditional medium of PR, which I'm not going to talk about in my presentation because I think Richard's going to focus a little bit more on PR. We also do a lot of social media strategy in some cases for our clients, execution in others, but since that was well covered by my colleague, I'll skip over that. We also do a lot of VIP relations and sort of one-on-one events, direct marketing, that sort of thing. But what I'm going to focus on today is a marketing campaign that Lorena pointed out to me when we were preparing for this that we had worked on that she thought was interesting and successful and that might be the most relevant case study for you. So among our many clients, we work with art fairs, we work with museums, we work with not-for-profits, we work with biennials, we work with brands in the art world such as BMW and Rolls-Royce. One of our clients who we've worked with since 1996 is Art Basel. And we work with them in a variety of capacities, but what I'm going to tell you about today is the Meet the Gallerist campaign. So in the early fall, we were having strategic brainstorming sessions around what can we offer to galleries in terms of helping them? I think there's been a lot of talk in the past few days about sort of the crisis around the gallery system. How do we support galleries? There's not enough foot traffic. There's a tendency to blame the art fair, which obviously Art Basel does not believe is the case and actually wants to reinforce and support the galleries and sees Art Basel itself as a platform, as a meeting place, as an exchange where people can come together. And then ultimately the goal is that you would then go to their booth, go to their actual bricks and mortar spaces after you've been to their booth. You'd get to know a gallerist, you'd form a relationship. And that's what often drives people to your gallery again and again. It's the content, it's the program, and oftentimes it's your personal relationship that they come back for. So what we came up with together, Art Basel and my team, was this concept of Meet the Gallerists. So we profiled 6 gallerists who were participating in Art Basel in Miami Beach for the first time, and we made 2 to 3 minute video profiles of each gallerist of these 6 that we identified to introduce you to them, to help you know their program, and such that when you walked by their booth, you already had heard of Antenna Space. It wasn't so foreign to you, and you might be more likely to go in. You might recognize Simon Wang and think, oh, I watched you in a video. So it's about a couple of things, this campaign. It's about storytelling, it's about humanizing, and it's about personalization. So it's about creating this concept that these galleries aren't just mega galleries or something that exists in an ether, but they're run by actual people who have an actual passion for contemporary art. I thought the most moving part of yesterday was Ursula Krinzinger talking about her passion. I will die in my gallery, she says. And I thought that was so beautiful. And so often galleries are only written about in the context of the market, in this concept of being mega dealers or pursuing the latest deal. And often galleries are heroes to artists. They're building careers. They're doing a lot of incredible work. And what we wanted to showcase were some of these stories. So I am so proud of all of them. I could show you any number of them, but what I want to show you is the, let me see where it went. I want to show you Sverre Semler if I can, but it doesn't seem to be pulled up. All right, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you the one that is here, but there's an amazing one of André Sverre Semler in her gallery in Beirut that I encourage you to watch afterwards. She's just incredible.
Yeah, we sell also dreams there. About this you have to talk. And
It's not letting me make it bigger for you.
The story of the gallery started with Brussels. Brussels Brussels is very open, it's very diverse, and also it was a place where I could show artists where
If you can.
there was no concurrence with London or with New York. It was kind of like a dark spot here for what I had in mind here. I think for a lot of artists, Brussels is interesting because they find these studios and also possibilities to live a bit like Berlin. And this is very important for the art scene. So now we are here in the show of Michael Kreber. That's our recent show now. Michael is an old friend. He was also one of the first artists we showed in 2004, the first time. It's a series of 12 new paintings. I think it's one of the best shows I saw from him, so I'm very happy to have this show. The pink one in the middle, because here I like very much this kind of movement, and this here. That's brilliant. I think the artists we work with are not the easiest one by digesting them, but on the long term, I think they're the most interesting one. When you are an artist, you also see your gallery a bit like as something artistic. The idea or the beginning was not commercial at all. We were like sweating that the artist would be happy with what we were doing. So that was the only thing. It was not important that we sell. It was like, how's the setting? How is like the atmosphere? Like that was the main thing. In our first year in Art Basel, Miami, we will show Gillian Carnegie. She's a painter from London. We show Peter Wächtler, a German artist, a drawer, filmmaker, and we show Ed Atkins. He's known for his videos and also for drawings. It's not only about the business. We sell also dreams there. About this you have to talk here. And
There we go. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague Richard, and unless you wanted to ask questions first.
I think I'll come back to all of you together, I think.
Makes sense.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and just take a bit of a macro approach to this panel. And I want to just start by telling a story, a brief story. I'm going to set the scene. It's a real story. It happened last Saturday night. I was at an art party. I'm sure you're all very familiar with art parties. Standing on a beautiful terrace with a crowd of about 300 people, a mix of artists, curators, museum directors. There was Nick Sirota in one corner, the ex-director of Tate. There was Maria Balshaw in another corner, the current director of Tate. The artist Glenn Ligon was in another corner talking to the curator Doug Vogel from LA. Anita and Poju Zablodovich, collectors, were surveying the scene. So what was it? What was this occasion on Saturday night? Well, it was the opening of the first new space outside of London for one of my clients, Thomas Dane Gallery. I'm really trying to resist categorizing the gallery, but you could probably call them a top-tier, mid-sized gallery. So where was I? New York, Hong Kong, Shanghai. No, I was in Naples. This is a picture of the view of Naples from the terrace that I was just talking about with Vesuvius in the background. Naples is a beautiful and romantic city, but not exactly a prime contender, you might think, for the second location for a leading gallery with a successful roster of international artists. But this is exactly the point, and this is why I wanted to talk about this today. By opening in Naples, Thomas Dane Gallery has shocked and surprised, or at the very least has captured the imagination. And at the root of this, it's a great story. And this is really what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about storytelling. So my company, Scott&Co, we're a PR and strategic communications company based in London. Our elevator pitch is, we are storytellers for clients who shape culture. And this has come from really a very simple realization that at the heart of every successful campaign that we've done, and also every successful campaign that we've seen other people do, is a great story. And this is even more relevant as we move inexorably towards a digital world. Content, we all talk about content a lot. Ossian is the head of it. Content is king. There have never been more platforms and online opportunities to share and consume and post content. And in this new landscape, having compelling stories is so paramount. Stories basically are your content, and this is how you will attract new audiences. So this is very much our approach as an agency. We put the story at the heart of everything, whether it's an online campaign, whether it's print, whether it's a gallery dinner, an event, a panel discussion like this, a lobbying campaign. Storytelling is always our point of departure. So just to bring this to life, I'm just going to show you 3 very quick examples from our client list. I'm going to go back to Naples just briefly, because this story really feels so pertinent to so many of the conversations that we've had these past couple of days, and also so pertinent to the topic of this panel. How do galleries reach new audiences through communications? Well, a very compelling way to do this is really to challenge the existing narrative. And this is exactly what happened with Naples. So against the backdrop of mega galleries opening in Hong Kong and New York and London, there's nothing wrong with that narrative, but it's a very well-trodden one. What we were able to do with this story is cut through that narrative and completely reinvigorate it. Our story focuses on how Thomas Dane Gallery can, instead of chasing the market, our story has really been about putting the artist back at the center of the gallery operation by creating a space that artists can visit, can stay. There's an apartment next to, as part of the gallery, and can show work in. At worst, this is just a hopelessly romantic story that's perhaps a bit mad, and it is a bit mad. But at best, it's a very clever move that puts the artist in the center and allows the gallery to stand apart from its competition. So a quick result. This is, in fact, I've just realized I'm not sure I'm allowed to share this because this hasn't actually published yet. This publishes next weekend. Oops. The Wall Street Journal magazine. It's a double-page spread on the opening of the gallery. You can see the stand first there. I think the previous discussion talks about David's, in fact, quoted David Swerner in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago. The Wall Street Journal is usually the preserver of the mega dealers like Larry Gagosian. They did a big profile on him a year or so ago. David Swerner. With the story, with challenging our narrative, we're able to secure this kind of press coverage for our client. Engagement. We were talking yesterday a lot about how can galleries engage the 95% and not stay focused on the 5%. This is a great example. This is British Vogue's Instagram account, not a art specialist destination, but the story basically leads to engagement, and that leads to new audiences. Of course, there's a scale issue here. Not every gallery can open a space in Naples just to attract new audiences. But I think the point is this is a scalable idea. There are plenty of ways that you can challenge your narrative through your program, through your events, through your presentation at art fairs. Okay. Excuse me. Next up, this example is not a gallery, but it's actually a collector client of ours. She's called Pamela Joyner. She's based between San Francisco and New York. And between her and her husband, Fred Jafrida, they have amassed one of the most important, if not the most important, collection of abstract art by artists of colour. When I first sat down with Pamela, our first meeting, I asked her what I always ask new clients, which is, what's your objective? What do you want to achieve? And Pamela shot back very quickly, very deadpan, but very seriously, I want to rewrite art history. Pamela and Fred's collection is really a collection that is based on reorienting the place of black artists within the art history canon, especially within institutions. And there's a particular focus on abstract work, because artists of colour working in the 70s and 80s were not only excluded from the predominant kind of canon, but were also often rejected from the black community because they weren't making work that was overtly political. So Pamela and Fred, they collect because they love the work, but really also to leverage their position and their authority and their relationships with artists to affect change. And really what I wanted to illustrate here was that through storytelling you can really create a movement, and that's what this campaign became. So the tools we had were a book. So we published a book at the end of 2016, featuring the collection, but also featuring critical texts by curators from Mark Godfrey from Tate, to Thelma Golden, Nick Cullinan, and then an exhibition which is based on the collection will tour 8 institutions in the States. It's already started. It opened at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art in New Orleans at the end of last year, and it will end up next year at the Baltimore Museum of Art, curated by Chris Bedford and Katie Siegel, who were the curators of the US Pavilion Mark Bradford at Venice last year. So how we told this story, really through a number of platforms, chiefly strategic media relations, but also a high-profile series of events, panel discussions, a bit like this, and symposia with artists. And this is the invitation to the symposium that we did in Venice last year with Mark Bradford. Okay, and another result. So through this work and really through the story, we're able to get Pamela, but more importantly, it's not really about Pamela, it's really more about her mission onto the front page of the art section of the New York Times. So I guess the takeaway here is through smart storytelling, you can create movement. And then lastly, just to finish off, Frieze Art Fair, that's been a client of mine. I think this is the 9th year that we're going in to our relationship. The story I want to talk about here is a story of reinvention. Frieze is one of the most recognizable and one of the most successful brands in the art world. That brings a lot of challenges as much as it celebrates success. It's a challenge every year to keep a story and a brand that everyone is very familiar about and has opinions about, to keep it fresh and to keep it moving. To keep it fresh, in order to make sure that you're talking to your audiences in a relevant way. Okay, this is a aerial photo of Frieze New York. So the way we've done this with Frieze is really through innovation. Frieze is one of the most innovative brands in the art world, partly because it was born from an editorial source. It started as a magazine, as I'm sure you all know. But it's really been led by a forward-thinking leadership that puts innovation at the forefront of everything that they do, whether that's expansion to different experiences and events like Frieze Masters and Frieze New York, which started in 2012, or to the constant innovation and development of different sections within the actual fair itself. So 2 years ago in 2016, a new curated section within Frieze London, a gallery section, but a curated section, was presented called The 90s, curated by Nicolas Tremblay. And then last year at Frieze London, there was a curated section called Sex Work, featuring work by radical female artists, curated by Alison Gingeras. Institutional relationship support, developing different platforms, and using different communication strategies have all led innovation to make sure that Frieze is engaging with existing audiences and meeting new audiences. And I think I will leave it there.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, from my perspective of being an art lover and a journalist, so I receive information from different channels in different ways. You're in the business of creating content or making content happen, but how much content can people take? And are you worried about the limitations of people's attention spans and how to cope with this sort of deluge of information that you, amongst others, and me, we're all creating? I mean, how to stand out in this kind of...
I think the quantity question comes later. The first question is quality. If you're producing quality content that your audience wants to receive and on channels they've selected to receive it from, there isn't really a quantity problem. It's more going to be a problem of resources on your side of how to produce enough content to feed that interest. Certainly during show times and during biennials and during fairs, we see that even if we increase the level of activity on a social media channel times 5, times 10, we're still seeing increased engagement during those weeks because we're providing content people want. So I would focus much more on the quality issue over the quantity issue. The quantity issue can be tweaked. You can monitor your numbers. You'll find the point of diminishing returns through trial and error and monitoring your statistics, particularly in terms of social media. That's very, very easy to suss out, actually, is what your audience wants from you and when they want to receive it. But what's more difficult is to mine what you have in terms of your archives, like you were talking about yesterday, going through what you have and finding a way to present it that's interesting, that's engaging, that meets people, that utilizes the tools and the features of whatever platform you decide to do it on. If you're going to do a Facebook Live, utilize what makes Facebook Live great. Tell a story that's well suited for that platform. In the same way, if you're going to produce a video series, you do something very differently than if you were, the type of content you select is very different than if you were doing a Facebook Live. So I think it's more about the content for the platform.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you do Facebook for one certain thing that you find works, Instagram for images, Twitter for witty things. But I've got a more radical solution, which is just to go the other way. We actually think that people do get spammed and bombarded too much, not just by us, but by everyone. So if you're a collector or you're an interested party, you just get tons of these things, invites nonstop. So we look the other way. We think, what can we make that we can print that's nice? Mm-hmm. Should we be making a magazine? Should we make a book? Should we send them a nice card? And we don't, because we don't like wasting paper, and we don't send really thick, huge invites anymore like probably we used to. Mm-hmm. But where does that lead? It just leads to more online noise. So we also think about that. We also think about changing completely and going back to old school print, which I like.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
I think it's an evolving landscape. I mean, on the one hand, in print media, there's an ever-diminishing kind of opportunity. Magazines closing, pages shrinking. Everyone wants to be in the FT or the New York Times, and there's only so many stories that actually can, that those outlets can accommodate. But then, of course, there's so many new outlets through digital, and I think it is also seeing, just to go back to what I was talking about before, really kind of seeing how that story can be rolled out in many different ways. So rather than saying, okay, it's an editorial campaign and we're just going to focus on that, it's how can that story have an activation through an event or through a talk or through online.
Mm-hmm. Ossian, specifically to you, how did you find the transition between being an art writer? How did you find going to the other side?
The dark side. It's kind of grey, but it's not so. It's not as dark as I thought it would be. It was interesting because I use a lot of those skills. I use those journalistic skills as much as I can in what I do. I had an idea that when I got to the gallery, I would write about everything, every work of art that came through, every fair. It's not possible. But, the theory is there that whatever we look after and promote, every artwork should have some text, some content. I hate the word, but it's my job title. But, it should come out of the gallery having been looked at and discussed and thought about. And, we think about these things. Why is this work of art great? Or why is it a development? Or why are we even handling this thing? And then it should go out onto the world attached to some bit of text. I'm not talking about a difficult, complicated text. I'm just talking about something that, sort of sits with it and means that we've actually given it some thought. So I can't profess to have written about every single work of art, but that's the aim.
Mm-hmm. A question for all of you: what do galleries want with this exposure, social, online, offline? What are they ultimately seeking?
I think most galleries ultimately are looking for sales. And the most interesting thing that I heard about in the last, I think it was Tim who said the word soft power, that what you're doing online isn't necessarily immediately going to lead to a sale or immediately going to change foot traffic, but what you're doing is creating awareness, you're building your brand, you're leveraging your audience in favor of your artists. You're getting the opportunity to tell your stories that maybe the press aren't telling. Richard's absolutely right. Clients want the FT, they want the New York Times. And sometimes content you publish and serve to your own audience directly is even more effective or as effective. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important that we recognize each channel for what it can bring us, but not choose one over another and not look for the same results from each platform. We do a Facebook Live for a different reason than we tweet, for a different reason than we post on Instagram. And it's about knowing which audience is where, what they want from you, and kind of serving up the appropriate content for them. And it's about getting away from ROI that's purely quantitative, although we certainly have that data in support of social media as well, and actually even in support of sales, even though that I wouldn't encourage you to do social media for the purpose of sales. Many galleries actually see sales via social media. But I think it's really important to look at it for what it can bring you. The opportunity to tell your story in language that you're comfortable with, in the way you want to be positioned and presented. Right now, there's so much noise out there. And if you can position yourself the way you want to be perceived, the way your artists deserve to be perceived, how much more successful is the content you're generating?
I think different gallerists actually it completely depends. I think from my experience, there are some galleries who know exactly what they want, mm-hmm. and they're very good at communicating that to us, and mm-hmm. that's great because then we can do what they want and hopefully keep them happy. Some galleries know what they want, but it's not what we think they should want. So that's often an interesting kind of dynamic when that actually becomes more about counsel and kind of strategic planning and using our experience and our network and our knowledge to actually, maybe, make recommendations and build a strategy together. And then there are some galleries who, have no idea what they want. And or have very specific, like there often we get a lot of galleries that say to us they just want reviews because they want to be able to produce a review for their artists, so they're coming from a very artist-oriented approach rather than sales or branding. I think Rebecca, you're right. I think ultimately, everyone wants sales, but I think it's kind of a bit of a soup of different kind of levels of expertise and savviness within each gallery.
Yeah, and it does work. I remember there was a piece about one of our artists, front page of the FT collecting supplement. We got calls. We're like, oh, why wasn't that piece available, Ossian? And I was like, sorry, I didn't realize you'd sell it off the page. So it does work, and I think artists want reviews. Artists want coverage. Artists want to know that there's some critical appreciation. Difficulty is nowadays, you're not talking about essays or critical responses, that kind. You're talking about people on Instagram. That's harder to explain, and I think it's possibly less interesting in a way. It's less engaging, but you have to. The problem with all of this is you have to do all of it. You have to do all of it all of the time. I mean, I was going to be a bit controversial and ask whether you guys can work with smaller galleries, because you charge a monthly fee, and you guys. We've just gone in-house after spending a lot of years and a lot of money on external PR. But what I see is exactly what you were saying, Lorena, that you have to do so much. You have to do the marketing, you have to do the PR, you have to do client engagement, you have to put on events. These guys can do that, but, otherwise it's you doing it yourself, basically. So I was just kind of wondering whether you guys can scale up and scale down what you do for a smaller gallery.
Yes and no. I mean, certainly we can, and certainly what happens often if we're trying to work with a smaller gallery or, say, a smaller museum with more of a tight budget is we'll do a much more focused scope, which means you look specifically at achieving a particular kind of result, and we advise on where to direct your resources, because you can't do everything all the time on no budget, certainly not, and hire an agency. So it's much more complicated when we have to do that, but I think that's when it's really important to define goals ahead of time, to know, is your goal a review? If so, we need to work together on PR. If it's to tell a story that the press has been uninterested in telling up till now, then perhaps we're going to look at social media. Perhaps it's sales. Maybe we're going to say, let's actually look at your database. The topic of this is engaging new audiences, but I would actually say to my clients the first time they ask me about engaging new audiences, are you engaging the ones you already have yet? Because let's focus there. Let's start with looking at everything you're already doing. Let's start with an audit. Let's see what your emails look like. Let's look at your click-through rates, your open rates. Look at how people are responding to the content you're already producing. Rather than focusing on new audiences, take a step back, see if what you're doing is actually working, and assess. We just recently did an audit of a very important organization who will remain nameless, who was basically spamming their clients with something they didn't want to see. We made some very important changes both to the content in the email newsletter and to the back end of the database and how they were segmenting their database and how they were targeting people. And we immediately saw a change in click-throughs and open rates within a single month. And then over time, over the next few months, we saw dramatic changes that actually resulted in sales. So it's a really important thing to not only think about expanding and doing more and doing new and trying the newest platform. Clients are always saying to me, what's the next social media platform? What do we need to be on? Master your own content, and you can adapt it for whatever platform you choose that to be. Whatever platform comes in 2 months, it doesn't matter if Facebook doesn't exist for a year from now. You haven't wasted your time. You then just transition and you change and reallocate your resources. But if you know who you are, if you have a strong identity, a strong sense of positioning, and you know how to tell your story on various platforms, you adapt that for whatever new platform comes tomorrow.
Wow, Facebook's not going to be around in a year. We better call him up.
You know, I don't know that it will be. I don't think it's not going to be around in a year.
How useful are they all? They're all useful for different things.
Exactly. And, you know, last year when they first changed the algorithm and Facebook became pay to play, everyone said, the death of Facebook.
Yeah.
No, not the death of Facebook, but a reorientation of our strategy around Facebook, what we post there, how often we post there. We now advise our clients to post less there, but post certain content that performs really well there. Facebook privileges video. Facebook algorithm privileges certain other things that I won't share publicly, that we know and we learn through testing it. And once you learn those things, you adapt. And Facebook's going to change the algorithm again next week. We're going to learn, we're going to change, we're going to adapt. And if in a year Facebook is inconsequential, we'll all adapt and learn the new platform. I think it's much more important to focus on the quality of the content and learning who your audience is so that you can provide the quantity and quality of content they want. You know, you said you found maybe that they want less, but more quality content. So for some of our clients, 3 posts a week is perfect. For others, there's no limit. Literally, the audience will take as much as we can produce. For other clients, one a week is enough. You have to learn who you are, what you can produce, and make sure that the quality is up to that standard rather than focus on quantities, and learn what your audience wants from you. I think that's hugely important.
So going back to something you said, and this is something I've observed in my proper use of platforms and emails, and is video king? I mean, it's really video where it's moving towards.
At the moment, most algorithms are privileging video. That said, on Instagram, it doesn't have to be a video. You know, other things perform really well. Right now, Instagram stories are so hot, and we're seeing such engagement from Instagram stories. So yes and no. Video is king of Facebook, for sure. Video is an amazing medium for telling a story. It really allows you to unfold a longer form story in a way that engages people, but you still have to capture their attention. You can't go on for 10 minutes. You know, you really have to take your message. It's sort of like what Twitter was for all of us in the beginning. How do I say what I need to say in only 120 characters, right? What a challenge. We all became more concise and more articulate, some of us maybe, because of Twitter, because we had to learn how to get right to our message that you couldn't then say, continued on tweet number 12. You had to get right to what you wanted to say because you might be retweeted and it might be taken out of context. Video is the visual form of that, right? The videos that often perform the best are quite short. Nobody wants to watch a 10-minute video. So you really still have to get to your message, but video is definitely performing very well. And the great thing about Facebook Live for young galleries is that it doesn't require the same level of investment as, say, producing a video series, where you need to have a videographer, spend money. A Facebook Live can be done in an artist studio and can be totally compelling and fabulous for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, hit the 7-minute sweet spot on Facebook Live, and it costs you literally your time in going to your artist studio and filming it.
On the flip side of online video and is something that maybe Ossian can talk about, is that I've noticed that the mega galleries or the top tier middle galleries are increasingly becoming like small publication kind of houses. They're kind of really investing in books, magazines, some galleries. So what are your thoughts on that?
There is no right formula. We're all doing it differently, and I don't think any of us are doing it quite right, because one person has a bookshop, one has a publishing house, other person publishes books for every show. Some people rarely publish anything. We're all doing different things, none of which are exactly right. I think it's difficult because I think your artists can only stand so much kind of Lisson publishing. They also want to have a proper book or a book by someone else, So if I just keep pumping out catalogues, it doesn't necessarily help. So you've got to think about what that publication is for, who it's for. Again, exactly, make sure it's for the right audience. Don't just make something because you think you have to, or you promised the artist that you would. It's got to be the right time. It's got to be the right format. It's got to be the right length. It's got to hit all those sweet spots. Otherwise, it's a waste of.
But there's definitely
paper.
an appetite for like printed matter, like somehow.
Still, yeah, I think so. I mean, again, it depends on the audience. What I wanted to say about that, which was really interesting, you were sort of saying know who they are, and actually, I change what I do for all those different audiences. We built this amazing gallery in New York, and we launched there, and we were so excited, and New Yorkers were like, yeah, so what? Your Lisson gallery, whatever. And they were like, what are you showing? And we went Carmen Herrera, and they went, okay, now we're interested. So they didn't care so much about the narrative story and all the stuff that I developed. They just wanted to know what we were showing. Whereas in Asia, they're much more interested in the heritage and the established nature of the gallery and the fact that we're 50 years old. It's kind of a nice story because maybe they don't know it, and maybe it's a different way of looking at what you're getting from a gallery. So you have to know the audience, but also then target them with a different version of the same story.
So we have surely a lot of galleries in the room. Some of them won't be able to afford like a well-respected art critic turned head of content, or hire a gallery, which is an agency, which is expensive. What would be your tips for galleries to engage at that level?
I mean, so much of PR or communications, especially in the art world, is kind of relationship building. I think this is actually something that's come up a couple of times in the sessions the past couple of days. I think if you don't have huge budgets, to be able to kind of pay someone for counsel or strategy or whatever, I think you've got to really put yourself out there, and I think you've got to start making the connections yourself, start kind of almost doing your own PR, whether that's at art fairs or biennials, to kind of almost build a sense of your brand and kind of get that out there already, so that then then that can kind of snowball. And I mean, sometimes we do often work with kind of younger galleries or smaller organizations that maybe don't have huge budgets. But usually when that brings something interesting to the client list, like my client is a little bit like a gallery's kind of program. You want to have a kind of program that makes sense. You're almost building a community, and that kind of essentially defines what the gallery is. But it's kind of the same with an agency. Your client list really, for me at least, and I think for most good agencies, it needs to have integrity, and there needs to be a kind of discourse amongst the different clients that sit there. So we would kind of work with a client with a smaller budget if they've already put a bit of work in themselves. That's one other thing. I think it is when clients do work with agencies, the relationship is so important. I think it's a real misconception to think that you can just pay money. It's a little bit, I think, that's similar to what the guys were talking about with the online, with Artsy and ArtNet. You can't just, I think it's a mistake to think you can just pay your monthly fee and kind of not contribute anything, and then you're going to get a wad of press cuttings or social media posts at the end. There needs to be a kind of conversation and a good relationship.
I think the great thing about all of these things is they are present company accepted. They are free. You can get your own press. You can make your own videos. They tend to not be very good, but you can do your own social media. But it's a lot of time and it's a lot of effort. And you need to find someone who has an aptitude for some of those things. Don't go down the social media rabbit hole without having never navigated social media, because you'll spend weeks trying to work it out. Find someone, even if it's your son or your daughter or your nephew, who can tell you how it all works, or train you up, and then focus on the things you're good at, because they are all ultimately free. And we've just tried to go in-house with our PR. It may be crazy because there's a lot of volume, and it's a lot of work, and it's probably going to be more work now that we're doing that. But you do sort of need time and effort, and maybe a body is better than a new piece of kit. I think you're right. You can make your own videos, and you don't have to hire an expensive videographer. But often you only kind of get what you pay for. We've noticed that the quality of video, you guys made a nice video. It doesn't come cheap, but also if you're trying to film or photograph works of art, you don't really want to skimp on that, because the minute you start presenting the work badly, then it doesn't function anymore. You might as well not bother.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking about Facebook Live with not having a videographer, but absolutely, if you're going to do a full-scale video. To kind of go back to your question specifically, I think actually there are ways to work even with the larger agencies. The best way we work with smaller clients is through creating a strategy for someone that they can then execute. So, for instance, once, for our bigger clients, we create the strategy and we deliver and we execute on it. But what we do for other clients who maybe can't afford that is we'll create a social media strategy for you. We might create a marketing or an advertising strategy or something like that. And then we can do a workshop with whoever on your team is going to be executing that strategy. That's also something we're often hired to do, particularly on social media. Someone will come to us and say, we certainly can't afford to have you run our channels, but we would love for you to do, a 1 or 2 day workshop with our team that's going to be running it and teach them best practices and what works and what doesn't. So that's sort of an ideal scenario. But I would say go back to the basics if you have to do it internally. The marketing trifecta is still the same. It's paid, earned, and owned. So earned marketing is the media, right? Traditional PR. That's pitching. That can be tough to come by until you've sort of built your own brand. Paid obviously requires a budget. This is advertising. So you may not have that opportunity right away. So start with the bottom layer being owned media. Really get right your website, your email newsletter, and your social media. And if you have to bite off one at a time, do it one at a time. Just focus on those 3 primary tools of communication. Make sure you're doing each of those right, then move on to the next. And after that, you might have a story that's worth telling, and then you'll be able to get earned media. And after that, hopefully, you start making more sales and you have more of the opportunity for paid. So think about the marketing trifecta, but maybe think of it as a cake that you're building. Start and build the base. Start at home. Focus on what you're doing, on the content that bears your name, that bears your logo. Perfect that, and then build out from there.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, questions? It's a question. Exciting
Hi.
question.
I say all of this that I'm about to say fully intending to offer Melanie Gerlis a job after the conference. And I also admittedly have a PR company that I work with very closely and have worked with them for a long time. But I'm nervous about the emphasis on branding and marketing and content. Somebody said quality content, which just means good branding. And I'm nervous about, we're talking about engaging new audiences, but we're not talking about the artists so much. And it's interesting the way this emphasis on the identity of the gallery has started to supersede actually any interest whatsoever in who the artists are. And also, I worry about fake news or content or marketing parading as news content, and I don't mean that Ossian as a dig at all. It's just
sad.
But it is interesting to see that Hauser and Wirth has hired Randy Kennedy, AAP has hired Charlotte Burns. I'm going to be hiring also Georgina Adams and Melanie Gerlis this afternoon. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I mean, I would love that. Let's talk. But I worry about what's like getting those, the David Zwirner article in the Wall Street Journal which was really interesting and, a bold move, but it felt very bought and paid for. So I'm just curious if anybody has any comments on that.
I mean, I did start with the Corey Archangel stuff, and even though it's kind of fun and the cats, it's a serious way of engaging the artists in what we do. So, you don't want to do some kind of campaign, whether it's marketing or PR or anything, and the artists turn around to you and go, what was that? I didn't ask for that. You talked about my work in a horrible way. You presented me all wrong. It wouldn't go well for you. Trust me. So it has to start with the artists. And actually, that's why I think those campaigns that sort of come out of the work, I know it's difficult to imagine, Corey's an obvious example, but there's so many ways you can involve the artist even remotely. You don't have to have them do your Instagram account or something, but having them at the heart of it is definitely, the key. I wouldn't start without them. And we don't really talk about branding at the gallery. I know we have a brand and it's kind of meant to be quite quiet, and but we talk more about what other people were talking about, this ethos, about how do we further the ethos of the gallery. We don't try and put a stamp on every artist and say, yeah, they're Lisson, and they go off with the stamp on their back. We try and let them lead. A lot of it is just...
That's your brand. Which is okay,
real
it's not
brand.
a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so much of our work is focused on the artists and on exhibitions. In a weird way, actually, it's often very difficult to get press coverage on the gallery unless it's a very kind of market-driven story. And some galleries love that, others don't. A lot of my clients are kind of very discreet and actually kind of find that whole narrative a bit uncomfortable. So we really kind of grab the opportunities where you can talk about the gallery. I mean, Thomas Dane opening in Naples, that doesn't happen every day. So that's like the one opportunity where we could get something in the Wall Street Journal on the gallery. But if you go back to the example that I showed with Pamela Joyner, it was completely about the artists. And I mean, this isn't just because of her or the work that we've done, but the past couple of years, if you think about the sea change institutionally, in the representation of artists of colour, from Mark Bradford in Venice and Mark Godfrey's show at Tate, and which is it's enormous, and that's very much about repositioning artists in a kind of forgotten canon and driving awareness amongst audiences. I mean, Pamela's very smart. She understood that you need to start at the institutional level to then kind of filter down to, the general public. And what was really cute at the opening in New Orleans was we were upstairs in her exhibition, and there was a group of school kids, 15, 16, being led around the exhibition by a guide, and Pam and Fred were there kind of at the back. No one knew who they were, just kind of watching this happen, and that's kind of what it's all about. That really was rewriting art history. So I think that is very artist-focused.
I think our presentations today all tended to focus towards the gallery branding for the gallerists here, but I think your point is well taken, Lisa, and certainly I showed the Meet the Gallerist campaign because that's what Lorena asked me to show, but for every case study like that, I could show you one, but actually I can't show you because we're not allowed to talk about it, where a gallery has hired us to promote an artist museum show, and it wasn't about the gallery at all. And that tends to happen more with the medium to larger scale galleries that can afford that kind of PR that's not focused on them. But it does happen, and quite a bit, where a gallery will come to us and say, this museum doesn't have the resources to do PR, and we would love for you to do PR for this artist show. So that does happen too. So I think most gallerists still do really very much care about their artists and keeping them at the core of the messages. And I think we find that even with corporate channels that we work on, even with Art Basel's channels, all of these sort of big brands, the artwork at the end of the day is the content that performs the best. That's what people really want to see. Those are the stories people want to tell. And so I really agree with Richard that the bigger brand stories are the harder ones to tell. And so the Meet the Gallerist campaign was a chance for Art Basel to tell those stories for gallerists who maybe didn't have the opportunity to tell them themselves. But oftentimes, most galleries are in a PR cycle that's completely about their artists because that's what's the news. You have an exhibition changing, and that's what you actually can get easier PR on usually.
And I think the fake news thing is like we do publish news about our artists and what they're doing, but we find whether there's some miracle of algorithm that I don't understand about SEO and how you get your website to perform well. If you search for one of our artists, we do come high up. And that's not because I'm writing Anish Kapoor is the best artist in the world. I'm just publishing stories that I think are relevant to our artists. But, as a good beginning, if you fill your websites with relevant content and well-written content and linked content, it will help that algorithm, whatever it is. Google, look it up.
And I just to say, I didn't mean it so much as a negative. It's just a kind of, we are in this new state of discussion where, branding seems to be, even for an art advisor, kind of the way we're framing it, which is interesting.
I think branding gets a bad rap as being a dirty word. Another way to think of it is positioning, which I think is a softer way to say almost the same thing. It's about who are you, what's your identity. The brand tends to be, the physical embodiment in the form of a logo or something that becomes recognizable for people. But really, at its core, branding should be about positioning. It's about having an identity. It's about knowing who you are, and it's making sure that all of your messages on all of your platforms kind of consistently deliver and reinforce that, such that people aren't seeing this version of you over here and it's incongruent with this version. And I'm not disagreeing with what Ossian said about tailoring your message to the audience on each platform. I think that's important too, in telling different parts of a story. But they should all match up. They should all be part of a bigger puzzle that all adds up to your identity of who you are. I shouldn't encounter you here and encounter you here, and the two don't match.
Melanie?
Hi, thanks. Lorena, I'm slightly breaking the rules because I actually want to answer Lisa's question. If there's not about the job, we'll talk about that later. Not about that. No, I think two things. I think one, hopefully, any journalist worth their salt doesn't want to write an advertorial. I also think fake news is quite a dangerous term to bandy about, and I think in a national newspaper, there are nuances and subtleties in this world, or national/international in our world, that is just not going to appear. It's not in the interest of the reader, it's not in the interest of the editor. If you want that, there are plenty of other media outlets. So it's not fake news, but maybe a national paper is broadening the news, and maybe that's branding, or it's simple. But I think that is a reality, and it goes back to what the panel's been saying about tailoring what you do via different channels. I'll talk about it later. So
Any more
thank you,
questions?
sorry.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a quick question. I was wondering, I'm just thinking about the case of outside of the art world business, just as Anthropology, who are selling very beautiful and very expensive clothes, and they have a following on Instagram of 3-point-something millions of followers, but they're on the verge of bankruptcy because everybody's following and nobody's buying. So I was just wondering if you could have an insight about that. About, like, I know you can quantify all the data that you're providing to your customers or that you're using in your gallery, but then how do you know which really transforms into sale? Because obviously for some businesses it's not happening. Thank you.
You can't quantify it unless, like I said, you happen to have this freak occurrence of someone calling you up and saying, I saw this work. You just have to know that you're doing all this work for a reason, and that if you don't do it, if you stop all the noise, you run the risk of exactly that happening, no one coming to visit you. Yes, if you had 10 social media managers and no salespeople, then you're also focusing on the wrong area. And I think the social media, as well as just being representative of what the art you're showing or trying to, you also need to tailor it to who you are. If you're a big, loud, brash gallery, then do it big and loud and brash. And if not, you sort of tailor it accordingly. So it should also fit your own tone of voice. It shouldn't be like, oh my God, sales are down this month, let's start a massive sale online, here, tweet this. I think you can't be so reactive. Social media makes you think you should be, or you should be chatty or funny or whatever, and I don't think that's the right way to go. You have to kind of, be consistent.
Any more insights?
Well, in traditional PR, this has been an ongoing conversation for years. How do you evaluate, a kind of, to borrow Rebecca's term, an earned, piece of coverage? And there's this beautifully imprecise kind of metric that is often, or like used to be used, where earned media is 3 times more valuable than paid for media because of the advocacy involved in the story. I've no idea where that magical number 3 comes from. I think anecdotally, as Ossian says, often anecdotally, you can see a kickback. When a story publishes, web traffic to whether if it's a gallery, usually increases dramatically. Phone calls, etc., etc. But without oversimplifying it, I think the basic premise of communications, if you've got an incredible product, whether it's whatever it is, if no one knows about it, then there's almost, it's like the tree falling in the forest. It's does it exist? Did it happen?
I agree with everything everyone else has said, so I'll say something totally different just to give you another point of view, because I think they're both completely right. I think metrics are important. We look at metrics, we pay attention to them, they're a guide, but that's it. You can't learn everything you need to know from them. And we have clients who come in who are obsessed with follower count in the same way other clients are obsessed with a review in the New York Times or something in the FT. And what we have to get to often with a client is what's the end goal? Because follower count in and of itself is not actually a useful metric, I don't believe. You can buy followers. There are plenty of people out there with hundreds of thousands of followers, and if you actually crunch the numbers on their engagement ratios, they're pathetic. So I will take my 9,000 hard-earned followers on Instagram that include the directors of major museums, every art fair, my colleagues, my professional journalist colleagues, people who are really interested in art, who've come to my channel because it's all art all the time, and that's what they want to see. And I will take that group of followers any day over 900,000, because I know they've come to me the natural, organic way, and they're engaged in what I do, and the responses, the engagement I see is quality. So I think metrics are important, but don't get caught up in that we have 1 million followers, that means sales are going to be great, or that means that we're doing well. Actually, then take a deeper dive at what they're doing, and then take a step back, move away from it, and do qualitative analysis. Don't just look at the numbers. Look at how people are responding. What are they saying back to you? What kind of engagement responses are you getting? Sure, maybe we're not looking to take it directly towards sales, but I look to see when we post a video like this, not just how many impressions, because that's an algorithmic number. That's dictated by a lot of things. It could be dictated by how much money I put behind the post. It could be dictated by what time of day I posted it, how many share, all sorts of things can affect that number. I actually don't care how many people viewed it. I care how many people liked it, shared it after the fact, commented on it, emailed me directly about it and said this video was amazing. When I get an email from a gallerist after we post a video and it says my phone is ringing off the hook, we won. I don't care what the metrics show, anything else. If that's the response, that's what we want for the gallerists, is to raise awareness of them. That's what we're trying to do with this campaign. And so when I get that phone call afterwards, I'm not so worried about the numbers anymore. So look at them, but keep everything in check.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question, if anyone has. All right.
We have come to conclusions on the
Yes.
topic.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and thanks to the public.
Thank you.